So, hi everybody, welcome to Succession War Timeline. This is essentially going to be going over the events that took place between the years 361 to 363 of the timeline. For records, this is essentially right after Kaleo was born, so you're looking at about 13, 14 years in the past from current events. So, if your character, like Leo, is 18, he would have been 4 years old during these events. So we're gonna get going. This stuff is a little, what's the word I want to look for? Extra. It's not
It's
overly vital to understanding the events of chapter 11, but it is all canon. And if there is like you just want an understanding of like what got the Fey courts to where they currently are, this is going to be the most like recent history in depth, like give you a lot of extra context to really understand some of the dynamics at play here. So, Meg, why don't you start us off with the prologue? There's three key events in the prologue that kind of kickstarts our story.
Yeah. So, death of an icon. Asmerla dies in childbirth. So Cleo's mom dies in childbirth. Um, but the Court of Creations actually tries to hide her death. So they exile Cleo, the half breed, and they scramble to find a successor. Um, with that, it goes into the Court of Stars. So where Maya comes from. Um, and the Court of Stars, 4 days later, discovers that Asmerla has died, and they inform their main rival, the Court of Flowers, about the Queen's death. So they actually betray the Court of Creation. Um, this lets the Court of Flowers begin preparations for their own succession war. I knew what you meant, Spence.
Sorry, I missed
Um,
that.
and then, fun fact, this took place on the last day of the Heralds of Aouria festival. So if anybody pays attention to the calendar that we built, um, that is the day it occurred. Um, and then so 9 days later, after that, Court of Blackfire mercenaries are purchased. So Court of Flowers are currently creating formal alliances behind the scenes to get ready for the upcoming succession war. Um, and basically, they are meant to bolster the Perennial Knights, which is basically the name for the Court of Flowers' personal military, for a surprise attack. And then they are called the Barons of Blackfire.
Any questions about part one?
Cool, 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 cool.
Okay.
I did it that well. Thanks.
So I'm not going to go into all these word for word. I will post the document available for reading if anyone has any interest beyond that. But essentially, we kickstart the war with the Battle of Demona. The Battle of Demona is one of the few. Demona was one of the few rare sea islands that belong to the Fey Court. It was owned by the Court of Coral. The Court of Coral was led by a guy by the name of Lord Ari Lear. He was the Fae. He was a Merfey who was kind of like the leader of this court. Coral was kind of a very unique court because Coral was made up of not just Fae. It's the only court in the history that was made up of both Fae, humans, and aquatic bestials because they were very kind of like very open-minded, very progressive. They were on a sea island that was really large, so they were just a very, very big, powerful court with a lot of like ties to the like other nations on the sea and stuff, and just very progressive in their ways of thinking. Um, I think the little bit of history was that this is actually it's because of creation's ties with Coral. That's how Asmerla actually met Kaleo's father. I believe that was the connection there. I don't know if that was correct or not, Elo.
yes.
So yeah, it was just this idea that they're very open court. Because they're so large and powerful, Titania wanted to knock them off the game immediately. So before any war is declared, before the death of Asmarel is even really publicly announced, the Perennial Knights, supported by a contingent of Blackfire mercenaries, attack the island of Demona. Because the attack is like such a like war hasn't been declared, no one's expecting, and no one even knows Azmerla died. The attack really like the opening hours, days of it, really slammed into Coral. Coral was never able to really rally. The battle goes on for about a week, and while there is a little bit of rallying at the end, Lord Lear does ultimately get slain by Titania personally. So Titania is leading this attack, and she wants everyone to know that she killed the Solstice Knight, which he was the Winter Knight, I believe, at this time, or was it the Spring Knight? Spring Knight. Um, that she personally killed the Spring Knight, took his Solstice Regent, and essentially knocks this court out of the war before the war has even started. That leads into the next major event, which is the declaration of war and the consolidation of power. So, with Creation taking such a heavy loss before the fighting even was announced, people now start setting sides. We see if you guys remember from the Fae presentation, some of these names will look familiar. These are the courts that end up backing Flowers. It's the Court of the Sun, the Court of Stars, which is initially a Creation ally that swapped allegiances, Court of Dunes. This is the kind of logistical Fae whale trading island that Aphilia's clan comes from. The Court of Frost. This is where Leto comes from. They signed the agreement because they needed help with supporting their Sky Island. There is the brand new Court of Kings, which we will be seeing more properly introduced little in Chapter 11. This will be the court that Elb's character will be hailing from. There's the Court of the Eclipse. This is the court that Kurohoko was from. And there was the Court of Blackfire. And this is because Blackfire wasn't necessarily full on loyal to them, but they were essentially on retainer. So they were like, we're going to pay you to fight for us, and like, we're paying a special fee that means Creation can't hire you to fight against us, kind of thing. Once all these people essentially go, yep, we're going to fight for Flowers, Flowers forces triple overnight, and they now have these guys like dead to rights. During this time, Titania's oldest daughter, she joins the army. She kind of becomes like a commander in the army, not like a full on general, but she's got like a mid tier lieutenant, captain kind of level. And her second daughter, Yen slash Cilantro, joins the royal guard. And on Creation side, we have they announce they're officially they acknowledge Asmar was dead, and they want to hold on to power, so they announce Aurelia Astoria, which is essentially a cousin of Asmerla, and they're gonna like, okay, she's the next matriarch, she's gonna be the next Fae Queen when we win this war, come and back her. Essentially, a lot of Creation's allies, mostly out of fear of Titania, don't come running to Creation's side. The only ones that really back them are the ones that were their regional like solstice regents. So kind of like their primary loyalist courts, which was the Court of the Undying, led by Lady Loto Merlot. I don't know how to pronounce that. I believe it's French. Um, there is the Court of the Northern Skies, led by Lady Jiang Ying Yu. And there's the Court of Prism, which was led by Lady Juniper Vale. These are the respective autumn nights, winter nights, and summer nights. There's also is some survivors from Coral that's still kind of in the mix. They're not really a power in their own way, but there's because they were such a large court and they had so many connections. They still have some like refugees, like troop placements that weren't at Demona during the battle. So they're still kind of, and like they want revenge. So they've whatever's left of Coral is also allied. These three courts are genuinely quite powerful. They each hold a solstice mantle, which we established are almost like weapons of mass destruction in the capable of the Fey army. So they have three of them at their disposal. They're not giving them up to Titania without a fight. And these courts have been in power for a good decade, so they've had a chance to kind of like make some roots. So they're outnumbered, but they're strong. And that gets us into the next little section that takes place over a 9-week period. This is what we just call the Sky Skirmishes. There's not a lot to be said about here. It's essentially just a bunch of like little fights breaking out between all the various courts. Everyone's kind of feeling each other out. It's very early war stuff. But it's really a race to our allies because there's still 50 some odd. No, there would be what? 30 no 27 minus that, so about like 20 some odd courts out there, so that still haven't submitted one way or another, and depending if like enough of them go Creation or enough of them go Flowers, it could make a big difference. So they're all kind of racing, trying to convince these various other neutral courts to pick a side. For the first 9 weeks, it doesn't really go anywhere. There's lots of little skirmishes, but no major battles. Eventually, a court that had a history of never getting involved in politics, the Court of the Southern Skies, decides this is finally their time to get involved, and they get in bed with Titania. And pretty much their agreement is we will help you on two conditions. One, you'll help us regain some our ancestral homeland, which was some sea islands. And two, you will let us take out our long-term rivals, the Court of the Northern Skies. So if you give us the excuse to finally and the resources to finally knock out our long-term rivals, we will join your league, and that's kind of like we're in this for us, but right now like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Titania agrees to their terms, and they aid House Tenkashi with the invasion of the Sky Island of Zhua Wumen. Doc has named all of these. This was kind of his contribution to the story. So they're all very Chinese names. Um, but yeah, so that is kind of the addition there. It is also noted that the Court of the Eclipse was essentially very close to the Court of the Southern Sky, which kind of bridged this gap. And the Court of the Eclipse was actually kind of like piggybacking off of the Southern Sky this entire time. So now we get to the first real battle war of the thing, which is called the Clash of the Twin Gates. This is the longest entry in here, so we're definitely not going to read this word for word. But essentially, this is 6 months of fighting. Um, it starts with the Court of the Undying and the Court of the Northern Skies, duking it out with the Court of the Southern Skies, the Court of the Eclipse, and the Court of the Sun. So you got like a 3 versus 2, and then the Court of Dunes is also backing or their alliance kind of in the background. They're not really sending soldiers to the front, but they're providing them supplies, trains, fresh food, whatever they kind of need, like transportation, just a lot of logistical support. And they're doing that in the background the entire time of this war. This fight goes on for a while. Despite being outnumbered, they do have solstice regions, two solstice regions on their side, so they kind of manage to keep themselves in the fight. If like the Autumn Knight steps onto a battlefield, they'll win that fight. But the fight that they weren't at, they'll lose because they were outnumbered. It's that kind of sort of back and forth. Um, it doesn't really go anywhere, but because essentially more of both sides keep pouring resources into it, this becomes very quickly the central focus of the war. So both Creation and Flower send their own soldiers to the battle. This includes Commander Adarath Astoria, who was the younger brother of the previous queen, who has now stepped up into a military role. He brings a bunch of Creation Knights with him, and then the eldest daughter Titania, who is works with the Force coming in to support the Perennial Knights. So we kind of get this like future princess versus the former brother-in-law. They both coming back up, but because essentially they both back up the forts, it just recreates the stalemate. Goes on for the 6 months, as I mentioned earlier. Eventually, what ends up deciding this battle, is actually not any specific tactic, not any like soldier, no one being able to get the edge. It's attrition. Both sides will wear each other out, but however, only one side has logistical support of the Court of Dunes. So really, Titania's alliance just outlasts them. By the time we get to the end of the battle, the creation forces are exhausted, they're weak, their fortifications are falling apart, their weapons are broken, um, and they just don't really have the resources left to keep this fight. So, cutting their losses, the Winter Knight, Lady, oh, what was her name again? Now I forget this. Ying Yu, Lady Ying Yu, kind of does a diversionary effort to draw away the Southern Skies and all their allies to force them in this kind of one battle, while Adarath and Lady Elato escape with actually like the bulk and like the healthiest of their forces. So the Winter Knight stays behind with like the weakest, the ragtags, the ones that were probably going to die anyways, and buys time for the best of the best to survive or escape. It's a loss. The island of Junwon gets lose. Court of Southern Skies finally beats their long-term rival, and the island belongs to the Flower faction. It's a major loss for Creation, but they do get to live to fight another day. Um, the regrettable news is while this whole fight is going on, we're getting towards the end, they have poured so many Creation has poured so many resources into this fight that they have left the Court of the Undying's home island of Tresidor. How do you pronounce it, Elo? You're here.
Yeah, it's you said it right. It's Tressador.
Tressador. They kind of leave this little behind with a skeleton garrison. The Court of Frost, who's at full strength at this point, sees the window and attacks. And this is called the Purge of the Undying. For clarity, this is not a fight. This is a slaughter. The Court of Frost wipes the Court of the Undying out. By the time that even like they can even put in like their call for aid is picked up by someone, it's already over. The Court of the Undying is essentially massacred. This is the traumatic event that actually leaves Tal and Ava homeless, and getting eventually imprisoned where Calandra finds them. This is really like the key moment of the tragic backstory, and it was Leto's Court of the Frost that was the ones who did that. This was specifically led by Lauren Vassoon, which was Nail's father, and he led this attack. Essentially, the Autumn Night Lady Alatavo, the leader of this island, was on their way back with Adarath to. This is good. Their fallback point, but once they realize their island's been wiped out and their fallback point is gone, they are forced to find another fallback point, and they decide that if they can't find one in the sky, they head to the sea, which goes to the Exodus of the Sea. This is kind of a mirror image of how our war opened up, which is a great escape. This is your Dunkirk kind of situation. For anyone familiar with World War II history, this is we are living to fight another day, but we have to like escape. So, Lady Alato Mariette and Adarath Astoria split their forces up into a whole bunch of different columns and groups and takes them to the sea where the Court of Corals has actually been creating essentially a bunch of underground routes for them to use, secret trade routes, things that can kind of like smuggle them into safer territory without like with minimal danger. The Court of Blackfire ends up getting tasked to essentially do this pursuit and wipe out like the remaining strugglers because they're military. They haven't actually had a big fight since the Battle of Demona, but they suck. The Court of Blackfire essentially falls for every single trap the Court of Coral places for them. They get pulled into fights against people who aren't even like involved in the war. There's like they say, oh yeah, like the survivors are going this way. Then the Court of Blackfire examines them, and it's actually a bunch of just random pirates. And now the mercenaries are fighting just some random pirates, thinking it's survivors when it's not, and they just get bogged down in all of these like dozens and hundreds of unnecessary conflicts, which allows Adarath and Elato to escape and with the bulk of their forces back to Isadella, which is the home island of creation. And that concludes part one. Any questions for part one? Not a single question? Got him.
Not yet.
All right, part two, casualties of war. This is where we start getting a little bit more deeper. The only ally who is on Creation's side who has not been terribly active up to this moment is the Court of Prism. It's worthwhile remembering the Court of Prism is a very powerful court. This was the court that, when we talked about the historical timeline, this was the court that had the first Fey Queen ever. They are a very old court, very long standing. Um, they are have their own like specialty Fey subrace. They are genuinely well revered in Fey culture dramatically. They currently back creation, and they are led by the Summer Knight Juniper Vale. Man, we actually have a picture of Juniper Vale too from the other thing. Do you want to show that off, Meg?
Oh, I have to find it, but I'll grab it.
Okay. So Juniper Vale is the Summer Knight, and essentially she just gets in touch with Lady Fulu, who is the current leader of the Court of Stars. Fulu pretty much goes to Juniper, yo, we messed up. I'm really, really sorry that, like we tipped off flowers and we kind of sparked this whole thing. But it turns out we've been working with Tanya for a little bit, and she's a bitch. We don't want to work with her anymore. So we're actually going to swap back to your side, and better yet, because we're going to use the fact that Tanya trusts us to help you plan your own assassination attempt. Oh, thank you for sharing that. If you look in the chat, you can see there is a picture of Juniper Vale. Um, Juniper
Wait a
Vale,
second.
yes. Oh, um, might have reused something there. So anyway, so Juniper Vale essentially takes her 75 best soldiers into this like agreement with Lady Fulu, who takes a whole bunch of her specialized soldiers called, I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation of these guys too. The Pahelians? Pahilians? Elo, help.
To be honest, I've never said that word out loud, so that sounds perfect.
Pahelion?
Pahelian.
Pahelian, okay.
Pahelion?
You got it.
Helian.
Pahelian.
Helion.
Pahelian. The Pahelians. Got it first try. The Pahelians, and these are kind of like essentially the elite soldiers of the Court of Stars. They kind of go in like, we're going to go assassinate the queen. The Bahilians are like, yeah, 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 like we're gonna like bolster Titania's defenses, and then you're gonna launch your assassination attempt with your 75 best soldiers, and then we're gonna like swap sides at the last second, and we're gonna fight together against Titania and her royal guard. Well, Fulu is a treacherous bitch, and she was playing the long game the entire time. She is on Titania's side. So after luring Juniper in, and then they get ready to start the assassination attempt, she's like, nah, I'm sticking with Titania. So Juniper finds herself now trapped in Titania's palace with her 75 best soldiers, fighting off essentially the Titania, Fulu's royal guard, and Titania's royal guard. And it goes exactly how you'd expect it would do. It's a bloodbath. Everyone gets killed. The second princess, Celestris, who later becomes known as Yen, she actually makes a bit of a name for herself in this battle because she takes down almost half a dozen of Juniper's assassins by herself. But the grand finale of it is Titania essentially lures Juniper into like the main courtroom and tells everyone to stop fighting and fights Juniper in a one-on-one fight in her throne room. She does this for everybody to see because she doesn't want anyone thinking that like she's not like a capable warrior in and of her own self, and she wants people to know that she can best even a solstice night, and she does that. Titania kills Juniper Vale and steals her regent for her own forces. This is the fall of the third of the four solstice nights, and Creation's best ally is now hurting because they just lost their leader. This leads to what's called the Siege of Kania. Kania is the sky island that they hail from. Might also be a name that some other people might recognize. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. The one good news is, despite all of this, Juniper's fiance, Aliastriel Ilian, takes over as interim ruler and essentially determines, was kind of like ready for this, like had prepared for this contingency, and had been stalking for a siege. They've been prepping everything, fortifying their defenses, getting reserves of supplies and foods. They are ready for a siege, and a siege takes place. This siege is the longest battle in the entirety of the Celestial War. It goes on for 7 months, and essentially it's led by the Court of Kings and it's led by the Court of Frost. And these two courts essentially will attack the Kania. They give it everything they got, but Kania is a strong fortress. It's a strong island. The people are good at what they do. For every member of the Court of Prism that falls, they take like 3 or 5 enemies with them. It just goes like the siege is not going well, but it is a siege, and if anyone understands siege warfare, it's usually pretty inevitable. That being said, Adarath has learned from the mistakes of the Clash of Gates and comes to Prism's aid. But instead of attacking the enemy from the front, Adarath attacks them from the behind. So essentially going, okay, we lost last time because Court of Dunes was giving them these really strong supply lines. Let's cut their supply lines. So throughout the siege of Kania, Adarath, it takes a small group of kind of guerrilla warfighters that are all like, these are the veterans that they saved from Juanin, and is attacking and cutting off the enemy at their the behind. So they keep like supply lines keep getting interrupted, troops get delayed, battle plans get delayed. They have to go start attacks without like proper equipment. Those attacks get thwarted. This siege is going very poorly for the Flower Coalition. It's the first time in the war something is going Creation's way. And because Creation finally has a leg to stand on, they take a gambit. And the gambit is we're going to lose this war if we don't get more people on our side. So we need to do something big. We need to do something flashy. We need to do something that shows everybody that we can actually fight back and bite back. So the last remaining Solstice Knight, Lady Elato Merlot, Lady Merlot, creates an army based off all the various survivors that have been left over. So survivors from Undying, Coral, and Northern Skies. And she preps this essentially coalition force, and they attack the island of Helios, which is the home island of the Court of the Sun, which is Relson's home court. And well, everyone's busy. Well, the Flowers Coalition is busy dealing with the Siege of Khania. The Sky Island of Helios actually falls really close to the orbit of Isidelia. And because of how Sky Islands orbit, they have the ability to launch an attack with a very, very small supply line. And well, Helios is away from anyone who could really help them for an extended window. So they launch this attack on Helios. They're like, we are going to wipe out Court of the Sun here and now. We're going to knock out Titania's oldest, most loyal ally, because it's established that Flowers and the Sun have had a long history of working together. And if we knock them out here and now, and people can see they can't break Khania, maybe some other courts that have been neutral this entire time will actually come to Creation's side, because they're going to have a reason to hope that Creation can win this war. And the battle goes pretty much how Creation plans, with one exception, and that's the exception of Lord Dareth Sol, the leader of the Court of the Sun. Dareth decides that instead of letting them lose the battle, he pulls the ultimate kamikaze maneuver. He takes 100 of his best magicians, he takes them into the Sky Core, and he overloads it. And Helios is a very small sky island. It's one of the smallest sky islands in all of Aouria. This is why they can kind of pull off this really impressive feat. They essentially overload the core and kind of force it to turn into a nuclear bomb. At this point, Lady Merlot and her forces are like essentially storming the palace. They've taken control of the island. Their entire force is on the island, and the island goes boom, and it takes all of Creation's forces with it. Sun essentially loses its home island. Anyone who survived is refugees now, but they have knocked out the final solstice night, and the last kind of like meaningful army that Creation has on its side that isn't fighting at Khania. This seals Creation's fate. Like Creation doesn't, they have no more solstice nights left. They just got they made this big public thing to showcase they could fight more. And while they technically beat the Court of the Sun, it's such a Pyrrhic style victory that it doesn't matter. That goes into part three. Any questions about that before we go into part three?
Negative. It seems you're doing well with war history.
Cool, fantastic.
Negativo.
Almost like I wrote all this myself. So, anyways, so we get back to the Siege of Khania. It's been 8 days since the loss of Lady Merlot. The war is now lost. So, Illustrial pretty much going like, hey, like, we're going to lose, but the Court of Prism has a long, long history. This can't be like the end of our story. I'm going to essentially sign a peace treaty without Creation's permission to get us out of the war. And we're going to give in to Titania's demands and essentially preserve our legacy of our court. Titania agrees to the peace summit. Illustrial sits down with his guards and is then immediately murdered by Titania, because that's just how Titania does. She kills Illustrial and then pretty much goes, yeah, I'm actually not interested in surrender ever. And then proceeds to take all of that might that is now not divided and brings it against Khania. So that's all the courts that were like busy dealing with other shit, because now just all focus on Khania. So you got the Perennial Knights, Court of Frost, Court of Kings, Dunes is backing them up, Southern and the Blackfire Mercenaries come in, and like all these courts just come in. Titania acts at the tip of the spear herself, and they just wipe out Khania. They kill every single member there. The divinities is what they were called, and they are just slaughtered. And with that, the Court of Prism is out of the war. The last real battle of the war is the Battle of Adarath. And Adarath, who has survived this entire time, he's fought in the Clash of the Kings, he's been fighting at the Siege of Khania, he is upset, and he learns of Lady Elato's death, and it's kind of hinted that there was a little bit of a love story between Merlot and Adarath. And he learns that she died in Deimos, that Prism has fallen, and pretty much he's like led by rage at this point. He gets word of what Titania's kind of like a route back to Pterodon is after the events of Prism, and essentially takes his last 300 knights to go ambush her and hopefully just try to kind of kill her en route in a just like giant suicidal attack. He never gets close. He's intercepted by the Court of Kings, and who has about 900 knights himself. So he outnumbers Adarath's forces 3-1. And sky battle ensues, where the Lord of the Court of Kings kills Adarath himself, essentially kicks his body down to the sea below. Adarath's presumed dead, and the Court of Kings gets the credit. The Lord of the Court of Kings will be Cactar's character. So that will be our future Spring Knight, one who killed Adarath himself.
Interesting.
Dun dun dun.
Mm-hmm. And so this takes us to Creation's final stand, which you would think would be the final battle, but it's not. This entry, if there's any entry you're going to take the time to read, this is the one I really recommend reading. I'm almost tempted to read this out verbatim, but I'm not going to do that. But if there is anything in here that's going to make you understand who Titania is as a leader, as a character, as a villain, it's this entry. Because what she essentially does is she takes every single court, so all 8 loyalist courts, and blockades the island of Sedalia. So no one gets in, nobody gets out. And then she does nothing. Her blockade just sits there. They sit there for days. They sit there for weeks. And they do nothing. And the people of Creation have no choice but just to stare at their impending doom day after day. A few commanders try to rally their troops. They try to break out. They're just cut down. And still, Titania's forces don't move. Weeks become months. Eventually, people start protesting in the streets against Creation, against Creation's leadership. The Aouria Astoria, their so-called monarch, commits suicide because of depression and defeat. Those protests that turns into revolution, and eventually the common people of Fidelia, kill the nobles of Creation because they just turn on each other. The island starts feeding on itself, and the island starts falling apart. It becomes like a hollow shell of itself, and they still wait. Titania's forces don't move. They just watch this happen. More time passes. Eventually, civil war breaks out in Sedalia because all these refugees from Prism, Undying, Northern Skies, Coral, all the refugees that lost their homes by backing Creation, where did they go? They went to Sedalia for shelter, survival. Well, now they're eating all the food that Sedalia has left, and these guys don't even live here. They're not even Creation Fae. So war breaks out between the Creation Fae and the refugees that survive there. Refugees lose as Creation turns on all its allies and eats themselves. 3 months pass before Titania finally sets foot on the island. The island's already done. It's defeated. Only a fifth of its population is left. Titania still slaughters them all. They don't even resist. The slaughter is done before sunset. It takes her less than a day to finish Creation off. She broke the island without losing a single soldier. And that is how the Succession War ends. This takes us on. I'm just going to wrap this up. This takes us on to the Flower Coronation. This is where 1 year and 9 months after Asmerla died. So for a record, this is about Kaleo is coming up to his 2nd birthday. She is established as the new Fae Queen. The courts of Creation, Coral, Undying, Northern Skies, and Prism are no longer recognized as the ruling body, and they're not recognized even as courts because they've been genocided. In a twist of fate, the Fae Queen is infuriated by the destruction of Helios. One thing that Titania cares about is expanding her influence in her territory. Lord Dareth's soul, by destroying an island that should have belonged to her in her mind, was considered a traitor. The Court of Sun was essentially forced into exile. All the royal members of the household were forced into execution. They were hunted down and executed. This is why his young son of Relton was sent to Anamarth to exchange his identity and take on the guise of Relton. It was done to protect him from Titania's wrath. The average citizen was forced to either give up their identity and their citizenship as a Court of Creation Fae and go courtless, or were forced to become executed. This is the story of how Sarai became a courtless Fae, because her family once belonged to the Court of the Sun. They were essentially wiped off the map because they weren't a good enough ally to Titania. The allies that were good to Titania, though, got rewarded pretty damn heavily. And the spoils of war's breakdown is such. The Court of Frost was received the Winter Mantle for the capture of Tresidor and the blood price they paid at Khania. The Court of Kings received the Spring Mantle for defeating Astoria's strongest commander, Adaroth, and the blood price they paid Akanya. The Court of Dunes receives the Honor Medal. This is recompense for locating them. Oh, I kind of skipped this. During the events of all this thing, Lady Merlot's region went missing because it was up in the explosion. A Solstice region can survive such a nuclear blast. It's still intact after all that. The Court of Autumn was actually the ones who were able to locate that on the seafloor and bring it back into the fold. The Court of Dunes receives the Autumn Mantle as recompense for locating the region, and then also just for their constant logistical support in the Clash of Gates, the Siege of Khania, and the blockade of Isidelia. The Court of Stars receives the Summer Mantle for giving the advance notice to the Court of Flowers that Azmarilla died, and for the trap they set for Lady Juniper Vale. Other prizes go out as follows. The Sky Island of Juwanman, which is the one that formerly belonged to the Court of Northern Skies, that was gifted to the Court of the Eclipse. The Court of the Eclipse had been nomadic up until this point, so they finally have a Sky Island all of their own. Titania's eldest daughter took command of 3 battalions of Perennial Knights and aided the Court of the Southern Skies reclaiming their ancestral sea territory as promised. So they finish honoring their deal with the Southern Skies. They don't really get anything specific out of it except for like Titania just doing what she said she would do. And the Court of Blackfire is paid a substantial amount of money for their service. Their failures in the Exodus of the Sea are pardoned, and they're kind of released from their contract, guilt-free with no strings attached. But they don't receive the rank of Loyalist Court because they were paid for mercenaries. They never actually swore fealty. The Court of Blackfire, just for modern day, is pissed off about this arrangement. They feel they should have been a Loyalist Court and gotten more than they did. They feel they got scorned. In the aftermath, essentially, this is everything that takes us up to present date. We know Titania now is the Fey Kingdom has led. Titania's led the Fey Kingdom to become a much more militaristic nation. Their goal is the prioritization of the Fey species over any others. They want to expand their lair territory. They want to expand their strength. They want to be the one true defining nation. Titania is getting older though, and she knows she can't do it in her lifetime anymore. So she is now fostering her 3 daughters because she wants there not to be a succession war after her death. She wants one of her daughters to essentially be able to step in such a point of power that no court is in a spot to try to challenge her and just take over. So she's now fostering that one of her 3 daughters will take over as the next queen. However, there's yet to be an announcement of which daughter that will be. And that takes us to the end of the succession war.
Yay.
Woo!
Nice.
Good job. Woo.
Let's go.
Success. All right. Any questions?
Okay, bye.
No
What the-
questions.
What was
Dang,
that?
that was wild.
Kiss you.
Alas, I do not have any questions.
Damien doesn't even have any
Yeah.
questions.
What?
Titania is terrifying.
Yep.
Yeah, I
she's
didn't realize
completely
she was so
terrifying.
strong. Slaughtering everyone.
That's what she does. It's literally her
I see.
character.
Freaking
Um,
Titania.
So yeah, so I guess that covers everything then. I will post the document in. I'll throw it in announcements just so it's easy to find for other people down the road. Give it a read if you have any more follow-up questions. There's a lot of detail I skipped because I felt I was going to be in trouble if I went into every single little rabbit hole that I wrote.
Mhm.
I have a bad habit of getting a little too detailed into war history.
No, no kidding. As one who is working their way through the general timeline, you guys don't even know.
Oh, I know. Don't even with me, Damien.
So I guess if there's no questions, we're good to go.